Thanks everybody for joining again on another Whiskey Wednesday here at Binny's. I'm Pat. We got Brett and Joe again as the Whiskey Hotline at Binny's. If you have any questions today, please use the Q&A function in the bottom of Zoom. Anybody on Facebook, just feel free to type a Facebook question in. We'll get it transferred over and we'll get it answered for you. So we are welcoming this week Fawn and Sherrie from Uncle Nearest. So I don't know, Fawn, you want to kind of introduce the brand here and yourself?
Sure. Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey. For those of you guys who are not familiar with Uncle Nearest, it is the most awarded whiskey or bourbon in America right now. So 2019, we took home the most awards. 2020, we have taken home the most awards. I think 6 of those are San Francisco. Some of those are double gold from San Francisco. So we're doing pretty well on the award side. On the consumer side, we easily have one of the most robust consumer bases, fan bases that probably this industry has seen for a while. Those of you guys who know us, who follow us, you know we call you our whiskey family, and that's what we believe. I am on social every day talking to you guys, so hopefully we'll see you in the comments section tonight and telling us what you think overall. And Sherrie Moore is our head of whiskey operations. There is no one, and I say no one, who knows more about the Tennessee whiskey production side of things than Sherrie Moore. This is now, Sherrie, in between Jack Daniel and Uncle Nearest, is that 36 years in Tennessee whiskey business?
About 35.
35. We'll make it 36 next year. So 35 years. And so when you think about the people who you think know the most about Tennessee whiskey, the likelihood that Sherrie hired them or trained them is very high. So even though she usually likes to stay behind the curtain, we've brought her in front of the curtain to meet you guys tonight because our Binny's family is so important to us. So Sherrie's here for you guys too.
Nice. Thanks for joining, Sherrie. So how long have you been around now as the Uncle Nearest brand?
Yeah, we launched in July of 2017, July 19th, 2017, and we are officially the fastest growing American whiskey brand, independent in U.S. history. The only one that I think has ever come close is Angel's Envy, and we beat their numbers too.
You're very competitive with this. We've got most awarded, fastest growing.
100%. This is a running joke in our company that we have a thing with either being first or number one. And and if you think about it, the American whiskey industry has been nothing but, no offense, dead white men the entire time, right? That's what we've been drinking this entire time. So it's the very first time that someone who is not dead white man is who we're talking about. And I think it's incredibly exciting. But what I think is more exciting is I think it's important that all of these things are surrounding this brand so that people know we didn't just slap a label on something and call it good. That the entire industry has said, no, you guys really put in the work behind this. And I think that's important, especially when you're talking about thousands of whiskey brands that are out there that people can choose from.
Well, that's big because you started with the whole concept of revealing, the idea of revealing the fact, it's probably, Jack Daniel's is generally not a brand that's associated with African Americans nor recently freed slaves who were distillers. And the fact that what started out socially as a story was able to turn into something, and the amount of respect paid to the fact that it's like, okay, because you had a lot of easy ways out. There's a lot of whiskey out there you could have bought and slapped the label on and said, here we go. This is Uncle Nearest, wrote about him, revealed the story. So in what order did you sort of do everything? So you became interested in the story of Nearest Green, you researched the story, you brought the story to the world or helped bring the story to the world along with Clay Risen and a few other people. And then at what point in time when you were revealing the history did you decide that you ought to do a whiskey to honor him as well?
So this is why it's fun that Sherrie's on here, So let's see, we've got a little bit of time. I can tell you this story, and I don't often get a chance to tell this story, so I love it when I do, and especially because Sherrie's here. Well, I'm at my house. She's actually at the distillery. She's at the distillery every day. When I first got here to Lynchburg, Tennessee, the first place I went was the library. And I was doing the research, and my thought process was book. My husband works for Sony Pictures, so I was like, no problem. We'll take the book and we'll turn it into a movie. And in the back of our minds down the road, we thought about what do you call them? A commemorative bottle, but not really an entire brand. And a part of that has to do with, number one, coming into this industry is incredibly expensive. And pretty much every investment my husband and I had done up until that point, we were putting money in other people's businesses, or we were putting it in our own. The idea of having to be sitting on this side of the table asking people to invest money was not exciting to either of us, especially me. And so that was in the back, like maybe at some point. But in terms of the focus, it was the book in the movie. So I show up in Lynchburg, we both do, and we're sitting at the library, and very quickly it gets around who this person is. And I didn't initially find out how, but then I later found out we used VRBO to rent a home. Well, as it turns out, the home is the director of home place for Jack Daniels. And then at the time, if you Googled me, the very first thing that pop up would be that I was a New York Times bestselling author. So you're in this really small town, a New York Times bestselling author and executive vice president for Sony Pictures is coming to stay. Mm-hmm. It made its rounds very quickly. But they didn't know why we were coming to town. So we go into the library. We're in the library. We're doing research on Nearest. So then the librarian comes to help us with the research. And so I share with her what I'm doing. Fast forward, as we're about to leave, this beautiful white older woman, Sherrie, she wouldn't mind me saying older, right? Older white woman walks through the door. Now, mind you, everyone in Lynchburg that day that we had seen so far had on camouflage. It was duck hunting season. And everybody had on camouflage. So this woman walks through the library with this black suit on, a scarf wrapped around her shoulder, and she like kind of sashays in and asks the librarian, who are we, whatever. Anyhow, long story short, it turns out that she is the eldest descendant of Jack Daniel. At the time, her mother was alive, but her mom just passed away about a year ago at 105. Wow. So she is now the eldest living descendant of Jack Daniel. So she walks in, she introduces herself, and she lets us know, who she is. And I knew the moment I saw her that she was concerned. And it's a legitimate concern. If you think about 2016, when I showed up in Lynchburg, Tennessee, her family had just been drugged through the mud for 3 months straight, where people had taken the original story about Nearest Green coming to the forefront and had decided on their own, not because it was in the New York Times, but they decided on their own that Jack was a slave owner, that he had stolen the recipe, that he had hidden Nearest, all these negative things. So her family had been drugged through the mud for 3 months straight, especially by African Americans online, which makes sense if they read the story. And then you have a Black New York Times bestselling author that's sitting in the library to do research on this story. Yeah. You're not exactly thinking I'm there for good reasons, right?
Right.
But what I told her, and Sherrie can tell you what her response was, because then Sherrie got the backside of it. But what I told her, I looked her in her eyes and I said, I am not here to harm your family's legacy. I believe that the press and I believe social media has this story wrong. And the reason I believe it is I read Jack Daniels' legacy, his biography from 1967, height of the civil rights era. And at that time, you didn't have to mention African Americans. You especially didn't have to mention a formerly enslaved man, because no one was giving credit to that. If you think about every other whiskey that's on your shelf, a lot of them had Black distillers. Mm-hmm. You don't know any of them. The reason why we know who Nearest Green was is because if you go back to Jack's biography, Nearest and his boys are mentioned over and over and over and over again, more times than Jack's own family. So I looked at her and I said, I believe that this is a story of love, honor, and respect. And that is why I'm here. He said, however, if I dig into this story and I learned that Jack is not who I believe he is based on the amount of research I had done up until that point, I said, if Jack is not who I believe he is, someone will come down here. They will pull all the exact same research. Nothing that happens in the dark remains in the dark. It always comes to light. They will pull that research and they will write this story. But you have my word, it will not be me. It's not the stories I write. I'm a best-selling author because I write about love. And I believed that this was a story between a white orphan boy and an African-American mentor. And if I was right, it was one of the most transformative stories this country has ever seen. And so I just happened to be right. And so then before this woman leaves out of the library, then she tells us, she says, well, you know that book where Jack grew up and where Nearest was the distiller on the farm and yada, yada, yada. She said, you know that that farm is for sale. Well, of course not. Why would I think a farm from the 19th century was for sale? And so she drew out, literally on a Post-it note, a map of how to get to the farm. But it was like a Southern Post-it note. You guys in Chicago wouldn't know how to follow it either.
Post-it note?
It was it's like, you know, you go down to the end of the light where the red light,
Oh, sure.
and you make a Southern
No,
map.
that's Southern Google Maps.
Exactly.
Well, y'all, and then Henry's farm's down there, and the cow's probably out.
Look for Johnny's red pickup truck.
Yes.
Right.
Which, speaking of which, as she's leaving, after she's given us this map, as she's leaving, she says, I just hope there's not a dead cow in the driveway like there was the last time I drove by. So hence the Southern map. And so she gives us this map. We try to find it. Of course we cannot. And then we go back to the house that we rented that, as it turns out, was a big Jack Daniel employee guy. And my phone rings. And the person on the other end has the deepest, most Southern accent I have ever heard in my life up until that point. And to this point, I think I've only heard one other person that sounds more Southern than this person. And so that person on the other line said, is this Fawn? I said, yes. And she says, this is Sherrie Moore. You ran into my cousin at the library. She told me you want to go see the Dan Call farm. I'm a realtor. I can take you. And so the next day we go to the Dan Call farm. She shows it. We immediately make an offer on it, and we buy the farm. I mean, obviously I've skipped a few things, but we buy the farm. And I begin doing the research because at that point I planned to come to Lynchburg for 4 days of research. And then we bought a 313-acre historic property where Jack Daniel grew up, where what we now know was the original Distillery 7, number 7, actually sat, where Nearest Green was the first African-American master distiller in this country that we know of on that property. So I never left because you can't restore property and go about restoring it from California. No. And so what I did, I was able to do it from anywhere, just like my husband's able to do what he does from anywhere. And so I essentially relocated. I never went back to LA except to get close. And I came and began doing the research and bringing in research from all over this country, 6 different states, into that house. And once we brought it into the house, Sherrie would come and she'd visit. And she was like the sweetest person, and she'd come and she'd check on the research. I'd share with her what I learned about her family, and every single time, I think, and Sherrie, you can speak to this, that if you think that it's a possibility that I've come in to actually tell a story different than what I said I did, and then every time you come to the house, everything I'm telling you is about this story of love, honor, and respect. I think there just was something about that. And she said one day, she said, if you ever decide to, and this is my memory of it, so Sherrie will have to tell you if I'm right. She said, if you ever decide to honor Nearest with a bottle, I will come out of retirement to make sure you get it right. Now, at the time, remember, we had it in the back of our mind and had even done research, had called MGP, which, by the way, our juice is not MGP for anyone wondering, but we had called MGP, like we had done sort of the basics of it and had concluded that this was going to be really tough to go into the whiskey business. So we would really have to want it in order to do it. And we weren't at that place when Sherrie and I had this conversation. And so I just kind of dismissed it. And then a little while later, we had another conversation and it came to the same exact conversation. This time she added something that I didn't know before. And she said, whiskey is in my blood. I have been in the family business my entire life. And it's then that I learned that she had worked for Jack Daniel for 31 years. And when she retired, she was the head of whiskey operation. And so now, if we did want to move forward, we had the piece to make sure we got it right. But I still wasn't over this piece of knowing I was going to have to raise tens of millions of dollars to do a brand right. Because if you're going to put out a brand for the first African-American master distiller that we know of, you can't have it come out and then die 4 years later like so many of the other ones. It was going to be too important, which meant it was going to be expensive. And so we were still a bit on the fence on this whole idea. And then we were with Nearest's family, about 50 of them. I've interviewed over 100 of them, everybody that's on their tree. But we were with about 40 to 50 of them all at the same time in Nashville. And at the end of my time with them, of sharing with them what I had learned, they shared with me what they knew from oral history. And at the end of it, I said, what do you believe is the one thing that should happen to honor your ancestors' legacy? And they all began kind of looking around. And you know, when you ask a question and everybody has had the conversation already, but nobody wants to say anything. So they're all looking around and I'm like, come on, guys, obviously you've had a conversation. And one lone person puts his hand up and he says, we think his name deserves to be on a bottle. He deserves to have his own bottle. And that literally, I left out of there that night while still sitting in the parking lot of the Church of Christ. I called Sherrie Moore and I said, if you will come out of retirement, I will raise the money. And from that point forward, it was Uncle Nearest full steam ahead.
Wow. Dragged her out of retirement.
I don't know,
Well,
Sherrie.
it's hard to find a more compelling story, right?
Yeah.
You got, especially when you've got 100 family members behind you. Just it's like, all right, it's all on you now, Sherrie, and you just take off and go get some money. And Sherrie's got to come up with the good juice.
By the way, it better be good.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So where do you start when you're creating a brand like that, then, Sherrie? I mean, obviously you want to pay homage to Tennessee whiskey, as we all know and love it. And did you immediately have what you were shooting for in mind?
Well, I think it was a conversation with Fawn and myself. It was the three of us.
Hey, Sherrie, your thing is giving feedback. Do you have ear set?
Let me see. Yes. Sorry about that. You might be giving the feedback because I've been hearing it. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it was the vision I came into play is just like a technical, and also the vision of, yes, we're a new brand, but I could knew that it was, and that we had to come in with a different mindset, not just of this small brand.
Are you guys getting the same feedback I
Yeah,
am?
hang on, I'm trying to.
Yeah, we're getting
trying
back.
to get this.
Hey, Sherrie, is your speaker on your cell phone on, or is it going into your ears?
No, my phone.
Huh.
Hang on, see, did that help? Talk again, Sherrie.
Okay, can you hear me?
No, it's still doing it.
Okay, I'll say what I think Sherrie was saying. And Sherrie, tell me give me hand signals if I'm right. Will you mute Sherrie and let's see if that feedback goes away? Did it go away? No,
Did it?
I think so.
We're getting a little bit, it's better.
Does anyone have like a speakerphone on?
I have a speakerphone on.
I don't think it's yours though, because yours isn't, well, mute yours really quick and see if that,
Let's see.
no.
Said mute the
Suggestion from
phone.
Brian McIntosh is to mute the phone. She has the computer, microphone, and phone mic on at the same time, more than likely.
Oh, wait, that's going away.
Yeah, there it is.
Ah, it was Joe.
It was Joe Maloney all along.
Joe, see,
right.
the Whiskey Hotline shows. All right, we're back in. Thank you, Brian McIntosh.
Yes,
Our
Sherry,
new tech
try it.
advisor.
Sherry, try it again. See if
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
yes.
Okay. Well, as I was trying to say earlier, it was not just me by myself, because it was the Weavers and with their vision. You know, they had a real vision of what they wanted to do, different than most small distilleries start off, one state and maybe a couple of more. They were ready to go national, international. That was from the very start. So when you have that vision from the beginning, they weren't going to wait to see it. She already knew that is where our brand was going. Then that's when you start to sitting down, and it's some of this boring stuff, but making sure that we were putting in quality systems so that once we needed to go to ISO 9000, we are set up for that. It's already given material numbers to things. It's knowing where we're going to go with our barrels, where we're going to go with our char level, where we're going to go with the toast level. So it's kind of creating the vision. So, you know, of course, right now we have three things going on, and that is we've got the barrels that we have purchased that are aged. We've got a co-packer that is distilling for us with a recipe and oversight from us. And then we're in the design phase. And so there was already a vision here that if I'd come in with somebody else, their vision would have been so small compared to this. So it just makes you start out putting in the same systems I was used to seeing at Jack Daniel's, which is very different than what most small distilleries start out.
Oh, yeah.
They're kind of keeping their fingers crossed if we can just get people to come. And I want to go back on one other thing, though, is my cousin, when she met Keith and Fawn, she called me and she says, I'm always a little nervous when people come into town. She said, but I looked in their eyes and she says, I saw a real heart and soul. And she said, so help them meet everybody they can. I'm going out of town, but help her get connected with people, because she wanted Fawn to research this story. So I just kind of want to go back to that on that. But I thought that was good. And the other thing for me, and this is on the personal, is I worked with Nearest Green's great-grandson, Bus Edie. I knew the family. I'd sit on the porch of his granddaughter and at her house. So for me, it's being part of one company that's connected with my family. But guess what? The Nearest Green family is connected to me. Our families are connected. So it was just a real blend. And it was fun to be working for a big company, but it's really exciting to think that this brand could grow like I've seen others grow, and going ahead and having that long-term vision. You know, Fawn, you can speak to that, but I think we came in with a different vision than most people start with.
We did, and I'll actually piggyback on what Sherry was saying, because I forgot to mention this about her cousin in the library. Is after I told her why I was there, she said, then I want to help. And she pulls out her cell phone and she begins giving me the names and numbers of Nearest Green's descendants.
Wow.
They grew up together. They ate around the dinner table. Some of her closest friends were Nearest Green's descendants. So it wasn't that odd. Our master blender, Victoria Edie Butler, is Nearest Green's great-great-granddaughter. So she's 5th generation after Nearest Green. And she and Sherrie grew up as the closest of friends. And to watch, you want to see two people have fun, is bring those two together in a room. They're not getting any work done. Don't let them convince you of otherwise. They are sitting around shooting the breeze and having fun the whole time. And don't give either one of them cocktails. It is an absolute wrap and just a tour de force. It just is insane. And so the beauty of this brand and our energies, our synergies between us and Jack Daniel is we literally have Jack and Nearest's families working together. It's insane.
Yeah, see, and that's interesting. So just by laying out sort of where this starts, you guys, one, we know that the product is fantastic because now we have a few years experience with it, but the fact that you're able to arrive at that end because of the concept you started with, and then knowing the practicality of it's like, okay, we have the concept, we know what we want to do, you've managed to maintain that feeling, but then when you get to the hard technical details, then how do you decide exactly what? It's like, okay, where am I going to source the product we're going to start with, which is piece one. You know what your steps are after that. Does the sourcing come first, and then do you decide the style you're going to pursue based on what you know is a sustainable source of whiskey? Do you have an idea of what you want to do? So then you try to find stuff you can source that's like that. How much are you able to tie back into what historical records you have about what, for instance, what Nearest Green might have made 150 years ago, or what, you know, the point in time.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you find what he might have made at that time, tie it into something that is produced now that's sustainable, that then you can turn around and build a facility to produce. Oh yeah, by the way, in the middle, find somebody else to make some for us, greenfield, as we're starting.
Well, this is where we were very lucky, is that there were pieces of Nearest's process that we understood and that we knew. And so the source that we have is actually the only one in Tennessee still making it the way that Nearest did, meaning they're putting it into the barrel low. So Nearest put his whiskey in at 110 and proofed it down. Now, I could look at that and say it was intentional. I don't know if it was intentional. What we know is when he was alive and when Jack was alive, there was never more than a one-story warehouse that either one of them used. And so if you only are looking at one floor anyway, that this is naturally the product that is going to proof down. But what we know is that it went in low and it was proofed down. So when it's coming out of these barrels and it's going into the marketplace, I remember reaching out to Clay Risen, Fred Minnick, and Peggy No Stevens and saying, where do we think that Nearest's whiskey was at the marketplace? What we know is he was the best whiskey maker in Tennessee. And we know that because his juice never went on discount, which may not seem like a big deal, except if you, like me, go through all of the article or all of the newspapers from the 19th century during the entire time that he was making whiskey, and then go all the way to about 1910. And if you look then in those newspaper clippings, every single weekend, the distributors were the ones that would actually get the product to the people. So the barrels would go to the distributor at a certain proof, and then they would proof it down. And they were the ones that would put it in containers. That wasn't really happening at the distilleries at that point. So the question was, when people were drinking this in the marketplace, and it was so popular that when you look at the newspaper and you look at all the distributors, every Friday they would discount every whiskey from Kentucky to Tennessee. And the only one I ever did not see on sale is the juice Nearest was making. It was the juice coming out of distillery number 7, which then became distillery number 16. But that was the juice that was never on sale. Well, you can only do that if you have the best. So if we know we're starting with the best, we know he's putting it in at 110, he's proving it down. The question is where was it going out into the marketplace? So we looked at a lot of that stuff when we were looking at sourcing, and that meant that we were very limited by who we could source from. You guys know there's a crap load of distilleries out there to source. But we were limited by being boxed in, which is a good thing, to a very small kind of thing that we could fit within, and said, all right, we need somebody putting it in around 110 and proofing it down. So all of our whiskey, Sherrie can attest to this or talk about this, but all of our whiskey, when we are releasing it from the barrel, is usually anywhere between 99 and 102. That's the majority of our barrels. And so if everything is coming in between 99 and 102, we're bottling at 100. That's as close as you're going to get to cask strength without paying for it.
Right.
I'm a
So
big
you're
fan of
bottling,
that.
so
Go ahead.
you're losing alcohol. So wherever, I
Yes.
mean, this is, well, yeah, but that's unusual in Kentucky, because typically, you know, in the whiskey business, the metric is in Scotland and Ireland, you lose alcohol because it's a cooler, dank environment. In Kentucky and especially the southern United States, you tend to gain alcohol because the water's evaporating much more quickly than the alcohol is evaporating. So the alcohol relatively goes up.
Well, our resident whiskey nerd, Sherrie, can talk to this, but I also think it has something to do with storing in lower
Yeah.
floors, lower
Yeah.
levels. That's where you want to. But Sherrie, do you want to speak to that? Why it's so different in Kentucky?
Yes, and it has to do the lower floors and the humidity in there too. But it does go in at 110, and then we're usually about a 101 or 102. So it is the best thing you want as a production person.
Yeah, you're barely adding any water.
Is barely
Right.
adding.
Yeah.
That is what you want.
It's great, and you can taste it immediately, and more importantly, I think you can feel it, and it has that rich chewiness that you don't get when something goes in at 125 proof and comes out of a barrel at 145 proof, and then you're trying to bottle 100 or 105 proof whiskey. It just thins it out too much.
And honestly, as far as having haze develop with cold, we could get by without filtering it.
Mm-hmm.
We go ahead and do the extra step of filtration, and we use activated carbon and let it sit for 24 to 48 hours. And this carbon is very fine grind. It's been acid washed, so there's no impurities in it. And it's just very perfect for the filtration of whiskey. And then we go through diatomaceous earth. But it smooths the flavors out. You know, you can get real fancy, but I'll just say it just smooths that flavor out. Mm-hmm. And of course, you know, as she alluded to, our big thing is we knew it was going to be a Tennessee-based distillery when they built their facility. So we needed to start with a recipe that had gone through the charcoal mellowing, the Lincoln County process. And of course, that is what Nearest Green is known for, is that. So there was really no way we could bypass that.
Sherrie, can you share with them, for the whiskey nerds? I'm sorry, Pat.
I was going to say, while we're on the nerdy stuff, CB asked a question about what char level you're using.
It's a 3 right now. It's a 3. And the reason I say right now is I think with Fawn's permission, and I think I do, you know, when we have our own warehouses here built and working and making our own whiskey, we will look to see, do we want to finish in something? Do we want some that has probably stay at a char 3, but do a custom toast level on it? Make sure that it's done 24 months. So there's all these opportunities we've got. You know, we'll have our base here that we want to keep, that, you know, every time you get 1856 that it's going to have this taste, or what comes out of here. But we also have the opportunities to come up and experiment. And I think that's fun. I think that's fun. It's one of the things you can do as a new brand, and you can be a little more adventurous, I think, Fawn.
Absolutely. Well, right outside of, oh wow, the sun's coming in. I gotta close that. Right outside of Sherrie's office, to the left of her, is where we have built out our single barrel warehouse. And that warehouse is only 1 story, and it will only hold 3,000 of our barrels. So as Sherrie mentioned earlier, Nearest Green Distillery, what we have been building out in Shelbyville, that is the permanent home. That is where that will forever be the legacy of Nearest Green. will be there at Nearest Green Distillery. But we have been distilling, we've been co-distilling at Tennessee Distilling Group for 3 years now. And so most of those, not most of them, but about 3,000 of those barrels are going to move to right outside of Sherrie's door. And as soon as all the ricks are built. And so I would ask Sherrie, because I know we've got a lot of whiskey nerds on here, two things to nerd out about. Why did you choose natural carbon from coconut shells as our filtration over other, because you tested out everything. Why did you decide natural carbon from coconut shells? And then also, why did you decide on wood ricks versus what and non-temperature controlled warehouses, which is sort of the opposite of what everybody's doing right now?
Yeah. Well, I've just done a lot of work. One of my nerd things is I was treasurer of the American Filtration Society. So you can imagine.
Those have got to be some exciting meetings.
Yes, yeah. But I've tested from coal. The most carbon is going to be from coal, wood, or coconut. And I just think there's a smoothness that comes with that coconut. Like I said, I've probably done 400 or 500 experiments with different types of carbon. And I think it just comes back to it's more natural. And then on top of all that, I think it just fits in with a more natural process rather than having something from coal or from wood.
And I think people don't understand, because when you talk about char, it's the same thing in a barrel. What people always talk about a charred barrel imparting a char flavor, which is not true. Char in reality is neutral flavor. Yeah. It's a filter. I mean, the char in a barrel actually is a filtration between liquid going into the wood and then the filter for the liquid coming back out of the wood and into the middle.
Your barrel helps seal in those flavors.
Right.
And a lot of times when people are going for a number 4 char, that extra heat is actually just doing more toasting. And I think your toasting really does more in your flavor development, and then your char is what's sealing it in. But no, we do the carbon and the diatomaceous earth, both are old technologies. It's just about getting a grade that has been purified so that we're not imparting anything. And of course, always with our charcoal prior to going in the barrel, now that will be a natural process that we do. And what our plan is, Fawn and I, is we're going to take away all the headache as long as you don't mix sugar with it, but it really.
Well, it's interesting because we love our juice as it is, and it doesn't taste like our source, in part because we're sourcing, but we're not just sourcing and bottling. We're sourcing and we're aging longer than our source actually puts their own whiskey out into the marketplace. And so a whiskey that we are, so take for instance 1884. 1884 is generally going to be a 7-year-old whiskey. Well, those are being. There you go. That 7-year-old, it's not like it was 7-year-old when we bought those barrels. We're buying those barrels at 4-year-old and bottling them at 7-year-old. We're buying the barrels that for 1856 is a blend between 8 and 14-year-old. Well, when those barrels left the distillery, most of them were anywhere between 5 and 8-year-old or 6 or 9-year-old. And so there is a massive difference in flavor profile when you have allowed something to age longer. And because most of that flavor is coming from the barrel anyhow. So you have that going on. And then with Sherrie, with the 2 processes, and I don't know if you gathered this, but the 2 filtration processes that she uses, it adds an additional 48 hours at least. And we're doing that because she is literally removing the congeners and fusel oils and those things that do give you a headache. So when people come to the distillery, I tell them all the time, I'm like, listen, our official family line is drink honorably. Hard stop. However, if you are at home and you are drinking a little bit more than you might ordinarily, the chances are that you are not going to wake up with a hangover if you stuck to Uncle Nearest and you did not add sugar or carbonation. After that, all bets are off. But if you just stick to Uncle Nearest, and it's because of the process. It's so even, it's not like our co-packer, our co-brander, whatever you want to call it, it's not like this was their process. Sherrie actually went in and trained them on her process. And so it is very much so that even though we are building out our distillery and we're now in phase 2, phase 1, we opened up, phase 2, we were going to open up this year, but we were going to preview it. That, we'll see how all this goes. But while we are still building ours, we're very happy with what we're doing in Columbia, Tennessee, because they're doing things to our exact specs. I have an office at that distillery, just like I have one at my own distillery. So it isn't a typical co-packer type of situation where we've just turned it over to someone and they do everything.
Yeah, you're not writing a check every month and getting truckloads of whiskey in return. That's really great that you've been able to take ownership of that process, start to back.
Absolutely.
With those guys, yeah.
And they've been happy because Sherrie comes with such a wealth of knowledge. The last thing you want to do is to not take that knowledge. And I think that our whiskey being so award-winning, here's the irony of it. The kind of funny thing is that there is another brand that's within our same co-packer's house, and we source from the same source. Our whiskeys taste nothing alike, nothing alike. And a part of that, I believe, is because Sherrie was there at the very beginning and saying, okay, this is how we need to do it. This is how we need to treat it. And they listened, and I'm very grateful for that.
And one thing, and just on a little nerdy thing, the other important part is on this carbon. Again, we are not adding much water, but we make sure that we reduce that proof down to just about 0.3 above what we're going to bottle, because once that whiskey is set in the barrel that many years, and just to add that water is just a shock to it. So you need that water and the whiskey to mix for that 24 to 48 hours while that carbon's in there. So we don't do that at the proof where it was dumped. We bring that proof down close to bottling, and then we add the carbon. So you've got a lot going on there, but I think you can rush whiskey too much. That giving it 24 to 48 hours, even if you didn't add carbon, would pay. It would help the whiskey just there.
Prevents saponification, which is what happens. Saponification is what happens when you water incorrectly and you do it at too high of a rate of speed.
Yes, and then we go back to the barrels, and we're going with the Rick style, and we're going with it. Your barrel does 3 major things. First of all, it removes some flavors. If our Lincoln County process takes out a lot of that grain taste, but your barrel is going to take out some of those flavors that you don't want. It's also going to add flavors. It's going to add your caramels and your vanillas from the wood and that toasting and charring. And then when it's laying on its belly, then with the angel share, that level just keeps dropping till you're just kind of across there. And there's an oxidation that goes on in that barrel. And so on its belly, you're going to get more of that interaction than when it's up on its head and palletized.
Yeah, which is sadly what we see a lot more people going to these days, is these just giant warehouse buildings with nothing in them except pallets and pallets of upright barrels. And, I've tasted plenty of good whiskeys that come out of those too, but I think there's something to be said for it was done this way for 150 years for a reason, uninterrupted. Right. And if it was good enough then, it's probably good enough now.
Because a lot of flavors a lot of the flavors that come aren't like technical experiments that anybody did 150 years ago. It literally, your experimentation was, we did it this way this time and it tasted really good, so let's just do it like that again. And there's your lab work.
Well, and I think the thing that's going to be really fun as we start releasing our own juice, we began tasting it. Once it hit 2-year-old, it's really good. So I do think that there is something to be said about how they did it then, and putting it in low and proofing it down. And so I am really excited for folks to taste our juice when it starts going into bottles. But I got to tell you, if I had it my way, and this is what we're shooting for, this is what we're going for, it will not taste that dissimilar from what we have in our bottles now, because it's such incredible quality. We started off with an amazing juice, and Sherrie made it better. So I have to say that if we release from our barrels and it tastes identical to what we have in our bottles right now, I will be a completely happy camper. Now, Sherrie, in the single barrel warehouse that's next to her, there's actually a space that on the door it says Sherrie's Barrels, for her to play with char levels and whatever else. And so I have no doubt that there will be experimental LTOs, experimental barrels that will come out. But our core product, if we do this right, and I'm positive we will, between our blending and Sherrie, when our juice is released, it will not taste different than what you're tasting now. That's the goal.
That's the goal.
It's good to story. And as long, look, and even if there is a slight variation, just like everything that goes when people develop a brand that starts out as sourced with the goal of eventually doing 100% of production themselves, as long as you're honest about all the steps, and in fact, a lot of people enjoy knowing all the steps, you don't have to necessarily hit it perfectly, as long as two things happen. You're open about it, and ultimately what you get is good. Even if it's not identical, it's good or great, and something that you're happy that you could put your name on along with what you were sourcing. I mean, it's just transparency. In fact, for a lot of people, it's a great way to tie people back into the beginning.
Well, trust me, if you haven't figured out from us, everybody will know when we go to our own juice. We are so out there with everything we do. So don't be surprised if you see a big old band going down the street. Trust me, it will be a very big deal, because that is what holds the legacy of Nearest Green for generations to come. After I'm gone, after Sherrie's gone, after all of us are gone, it's that juice that is going to make sure that the name Nearest Green, that his legacy lives on forever. So when it's our juice 100%, and not just our process, it's going to be pretty incredible, and everybody will know it.
Well,
and
go ahead.
I was going to ask Fawn, you've also got, just because we've kind of talked about the product a little bit, you are involved with, from a social standpoint, a number of other, you've got a lot of things going on besides trying to build a distillery and develop a distillery and continue to tell the story. You've gotten involved in a couple of other things that have
big
either
partnership with Jack Daniels, right?
Or popped up. Yeah.
Brown-Forman. You want to talk about that?
Well, on the nonprofit side, and I'm very clear about that, because I think a part of why people love Uncle Nearest so much is we are independent. We are the guys that are out there that have had to figure this out as we went. We didn't have someone there to tell us, okay, do this, do that, do this, and to open up in their connections and things. We've had to be very scrappy to gain the momentum that we have. And so I'm always really clear to say, on the nonprofit side, we have formed an initiative together. So there are 3 things we've been doing this year. At the beginning of March, people will probably forget this by now because we've had so many crises, but Nashville got hit with a massive tornado. I don't know if you guys remember this. And I mean, it just went straight through downtown, East Nashville. And so we immediately got involved, and because we realized the next morning you had all these bartenders that woke up with no job, and most bartenders and servers, they depend on those tips to be able to pay for groceries and cell phone bills and rent, and so the next morning we immediately looked and said, how many woke up without a job? And we wrote a check to the USBG to make sure that every single one of those folks had $1,000 that was put in their pocket. But then I took a picture of the check and I sent it over to Campbell Brown at Brown-Forman and Matthias Bentel, their CBO. And I said, hey guys, this is what we're doing. Will you match us? And I mean, immediately text back, done, we're matching. Because I wanted to make sure that they had $2,000 in their pockets that would just allow them the next 10 days to figure out what was coming next. So that was really the second time we have actually done something with Brown-Forman, but it was the first time that people knew about it. We've been working with Jack Daniels. They're the nonprofit side of it, so I guess that's Brown-Forman Foundation, but we've been working with the Jack Daniel team for almost a year now for the Nearest Green School of Distilling. I realized very early on that we don't have a lot of people of color in our industry, but we also don't get very many resumes from people of color. So that's an issue we had to fix, was the pipeline. If we don't have people of color actually applying to come into this industry, because it's been white and male for so long, they don't necessarily see themselves in it. If we're not getting the applications, we're not going to be able to diversify. So the question was, how do we get people of color and women to see this industry as their industry as well? So that is a part of the solution, is Nearest Green School of Distilling. Once that is fully accredited, it's at Motlow State College. It will be the first time there is an actual degree in distilling offered in the United States. And Sherrie Moore and the VP for Jack Daniel Distillery, who Sherrie hired, how many years ago did you hire him, Sherrie?
Yes, he started in '04.
Okay, so 16 years ago. So Sherrie hired him 16 years ago. I'm telling you guys, anybody who's in Tennessee whiskey that's been in it for any real period of time, she either trained them or hired them. So Melvin Keebler, who is an African-American man who is their VP, he and Sherrie wrote the entire curriculum and then presented it to the president of Motlow State College and their board. They approved it. And which, I mean, if you've got Sherrie and Melvin writing a curriculum, you kind of have to approve it, because who's going to know more than them? And then it went to the state for approval, and that's where it sits right now. Once that approval goes, it'll go to the regional body, it'll get accredited, then there will finally be an actual accreditation, a degree in distilling, and it will be in the name of Nearest Green. So that's one thing, and we had been working with them on that. Then we had this happen, and then COVID, the pandemic. And one of the things we realized, because we have such an amazing and robust whiskey family online, one of the things we realized very early on is we had nurses and doctors and orderlies and folks who were on the front line, NYPD, LAFD, all these folks on the front line that did not have protective gear. They did not have the basics of N95 masks to keep them alive while they were on the front line. And so we put up a post one day on social media and said, listen, if you are in our whiskey family and you are on the front line, send us a copy of your badge and we will immediately get N95s to you. When I tell you there was no way to know the flood that would come in, thousands of masks were going out every single day. We just sent 10,000 N95s out today. It is something that continues. We've now been doing it since, I would say, about March 15th. And there hasn't been one day where hundreds, if not thousands of masks were not leaving out of Nearest Green Distillery. And so after we were protecting the front line, we thought about the fact that there were so many, Chicago's one of the cities that we chose, there were so many cities where African Americans and Latinas were so disproportionately dying from this disease. Right. And all of the experts said, the one thing that will help is, well, social distancing, obviously, and if everybody will wear masks. Well, for a lot of them, they didn't have masks. So we began partnering with local liquor stores to deliver flyers that gave information if they were in predominantly areas with predominant African-American consumers, and then delivering masks. We have now, I think we are up to over 300,000 people that we have provided PPE for, which is insane because we're a whiskey company. And right. we're buying this stuff top dollar, but it was important to us that we protected our whiskey family. And as it turns out, our whiskey family has family that need to be protected and their family that needs to be protected. And so we will continue going. And then we found out it wasn't just African Americans and Latinos, but the Native American community was just absolutely being hammered by this disease, completely crushed. And so we reached out to one of the tribes and said, listen, is this going to decimate your entire tribe? And they said, if we don't get any help, it will absolutely decimate us. And so we said, how many masks do you need? They said, 50,000. So we immediately got them 25,000. Then we got them 10,000 more, and we still have to get them. So we are, if there is ever such thing as a purpose-driven whiskey company, that's kind of us.
So who got put on the detail of calling all over the world and digging? Because you weren't the only person, I was gonna say, weren't the only person looking for masks on March 15th, right? I mean,
But-
everybody in the United States was losing their mind over
And
that.
I was probably the most tenacious.
Oh, yeah,
So
you
while
put,
everyone,
you put Fawn,
everyone-
everything's a competition weaver at the task. You're gonna end up with all the masks you need, probably.
You call it what you want, but they were taking my phone calls because I would not stop calling until they took my phone calls. And so, I mean, it's one of those things where you just, when you feel passionate about something, you just have to keep at it. And keeping our whiskey family alive seemed to be something that would be the right thing to do. And the thing that was great is on the other end, because most of the ones who were reaching into them were like brokers that were then trying to sell the mask.
Right.
So because I was reaching into them and saying, listen, guys, we are literally shipping these to hospitals. We are shipping these to doctors and nurses. These are going to the front line. They didn't charge me less for them, but they did give me priority.
You actually got to buy
Right,
them, though.
because we're giving them away. This is
Right.
not a business venture here.
No.
This is, yeah.
No, we've spent about 100 million, Lord knows no, about $500,000. We've spent about $500,000 protecting our whiskey family, and I think it's the best money we've ever spent. And so I'm very happy about that. So that has been our, up until this point. Then what Pat is referencing is then on top of the tragedy, number one, the tornado, then number two, COVID, then we have Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd very quickly, back to back to back. And this country has a reckoning that I have not seen in my lifetime before. And I got to tell you, seeing white people give a damn is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen when it comes to this, because generally when something like that happens, it's just us. We're the ones that are in the streets protesting. We're the ones that are on social media just trying to get anyone to listen. And this time it's been all of us. And it has been amazing to witness. The young people, I think, have determined they are going to end racism. Their generation, they're going to end it. And I could not be more proud of those guys. And so while we're watching all this go on, we already knew we had the Nearest Green School of Distilling coming to fill the pipeline. But that's sort of a slow roast version, right? We're still 10, 15 years out before somebody's in a top level position. So the question became, if we're not putting African Americans in top positions in this industry, why would anybody come in at an entry level and work their way up? We've never shown that there's anything to work their way up to. And so then it became, well, how do we get them in those positions? It can't be the slow roast version. So then we teamed up to create the microwave version. And it's got 3 different pillars really quickly. Nearest Green School of Distilling is the first pillar. Second one is our LAP program. So that is the Leadership Acceleration Program. We are bringing people that have an enormous amount of potential and giving them the ability to apprentice behind the best people in the industry. So just for an example, our head distiller, that apprentice who has already been chosen, who begins on July 20th, and that particular apprentice literally starts with 4 to 6 months of nonstop educational training, manufacturing training. So that's hazmat, green belt, ISO, as Sherrie was talking about, OSHA. They're getting all of those certifications. Once they have all those manufacturing certifications that they can use for distilling or anywhere else, then they go from there and they shadow the top master distillers in this country. Becky Harris over at Catoctin, so the president of American Craft Spirits Association. They go up to Sagamore Spirits, over to Peerless in Kentucky, to shadow after Caleb, then over to Chris Morris at Brown Forman, then down into Tennessee to shadow Jeff Arnett, Chris Fletcher at Jack Daniel, Nicole Austin at George Dickel, and up at Nelson Greenbrier, Charlie Nelson and that crew. And then they end at Nearest Green Distillery with Sherrie Moore, and then Mike Williams, who's over at our Tennessee Distilling Group. And all of these distilleries have come together, and all these master distillers, to essentially raise up the first African-American master distiller of a major brand since Nearest Green. So that's that program. And then the BIP program. Right before I got on this with you guys, I had a video call. It's 3 of leadership from Brown Forman, top leadership, 3 of top leadership from Uncle Nearest. And we were on the call with Chris Denord. He is the African-American micro distillery in Minneapolis that was hit hard through the riots. He is the first, he and Denord are the first distillery in the business incubation program. We are literally giving him all of our resources: sales, marketing, distribution, branding, PR, operations, everything.
That's great.
That
He was hit
going to
so
need.
hard,
Yeah,
that
he
place
got
got
hit.
destroyed.
And immediately turned what space he had left into a place to get food.
Yeah.
When we talked to him today, he was smoking barbecue for volunteers. He has not stopped. He has not stopped. I think he said he was smoking something like 2,500 pounds of meat for volunteers. And so these are the people who you want to see succeed in this industry. Chris Montana is the kind of person. So I can tell you who was on the call, because I think it's extraordinary, is that you have Matthias Bintel, who's the chief brand officer for Brown-Forman, Casey Nelson, Matt Blevins. They both run the Jack Daniels brand. And on my side, myself, Kate Jerkins, my right hand, our head of sales and marketing and branding, and Steve Henderson, who's on our side, and then Mark McCallum, the former the chief brand officer for Brown-Forman, who also serves as an advisor to me now that he's retired. And so you have all of these people on this call and saying, Chris, we are going to get you whatever you need to succeed. So where do we start? And that's something that this industry has never had. And so the business incubation program is literally going to go one by one to every African-American micro distillery that's here to, one, check in, and then two, say, what do you need to succeed? And then we're stepping in to help them to succeed. It's never been done before, and I couldn't be more excited. And not because I like doing everything first, Pat.
Well, but this is also, and this isn't an easy thing to do, because there were, everybody can get, and it's what you talked about with the difference between the outrage around what's happened in the last couple of months in terms of these deaths versus other times where outrage has popped up. This time it's much more multicultural, and it seems to be that there are a lot more things that are still occurring after the cameras have been turned off. And I think that's been the problem in the past. When the cameras go off, everybody goes home.
Yep.
And it seems like this time the cameras are off and nobody's gone home yet.
Amen to that.
You know, and how do you make sure these things continue? They don't have to stay in the spotlight, but how do you keep the action moving forward and progress actually being made when nobody's talking about the progress? How do you turn it into something actionable? Which is, obviously, you are shedding light on one way that can happen. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that just me personally being in this industry, and I love the American whiskey industry. I think it has such incredible, amazing people, incredibly kind people. And there is a collective problem, which is this is an industry that is built on heritage. Every bit of it, every major brand is built on heritage. Well, it's the heritage of somebody's great, great, great grandfather. And the only people who we know then were white men. And so the challenge is if you have an entire industry that is based on heritage, then it's really hard to get people of color in. And so what I'm seeing is everyone rally around the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative. I mean, even the advertising firms and the branding firms for Brown-Forman have said, listen, we'll do it. We're in there. They've raised their hand and said, how can we help? And I've seen this from every distillery in this country that has reached into me and said, how can we be a part of this? How can we help? And I've given all of them something to do. And so we are collectively working together to fix this issue. But we've got to look at it holistically. We can't just look at it and say, you're not diverse enough. Well, we need to look at what are the issues? Why are there not more African Americans in this industry? It's not just that it's a heritage brand. You also have the case where African Americans are deeply religious people, and just how our parents, our grandparents, for the most part, across the board, are going to be Christian or Muslim. Both religions, most of the pastors or ministers rail against alcohol, and specifically whiskey. And so, with the exception of one person in this industry, I have never met an African-American, Ebony Majors with Diageo, the
Right.
blender, is the only African-American I've come across in this industry that got into it intentionally. Everyone else that I've run across kind of stumbled into it, and it took them years before they admitted to their family it's the industry they were in.
Right.
Like they didn't update their LinkedIn page. Listen, guys, I didn't have Uncle Nearest on my LinkedIn page until 3 weeks ago, when one of my team members was trying to send me some resumes and said, Fawn, I don't know why, but you don't have Uncle Nearest on your LinkedIn page. I had updated my LinkedIn page over the last 3 years and never added it. And then I had a conversation with the #2 person at Sagamore Spirits, who nobody knows is Black, and Marcus Stevens. And he had the same experience where he's been there since 2018 and really has done everything branding wise. And it took him until last week to update his LinkedIn page to show that he worked at Sagamore Spirits. It's a real challenge because with African Americans, I'm the child of 2 teetotalers. And so the American whiskey industry, for whites who that's their heritage, we're taught all of the virtues of the industry.
Right.
We grew up with our parents and grandparents railing against the industry. So it is not something we are going to naturally be gravitating to.
Right.
And I have that from experience, and literally every African American that's at a high level in this industry, when I talk to them, it's a struggle that they had to actually tell their families that they decided to go into the liquor business. And so we've got a few hurdles to get more African Americans into this industry. So more than anything, we got to just make it look cool. We've got to make it so that they look at it and go, you know what? Maybe that industry wasn't as bad as my pastor said.
And
Few things really are.
And you want to fight, and you're also, I mean, and that's the right approach, because you're really, instead of fighting a 2-front war,
Yeah.
because instead of fighting to reject history while making history, you've only really got one front, which is making history.
Make history.
And what happened, but now we're starting today, and we're only going that way. We're only
This is
going
ground
straight ahead.
zero for us.
Yeah.
40 years from now, the conversation we're having right now is not going to be happening, because now we finally have an African American in the industry, not on the outside that's telling the industry what to do. In this industry, in the nitty gritty, that is been able to identify these are the 3 major problems. These are the 3 major hurdles that we have to get over with bringing more African Americans in. We've got to get the applications. I think I got my first application from an African American. I was already in this business for a good 1.5 years, and the person wasn't qualified. And so the question is
Right.
how do we get more people in? And so it was identifying those 3 problems. Now that we know the 3 problems, it's not going to be hard to get us in, because now we know what to do. We got to battle, all the folks who have to go back and tell their teetotaling parents,
Right.
hey, I chose the liquor business.
Yeah.
But if we make it cool, if we make it honorable by having a company like Uncle Nearest that's truly a purpose-driven whiskey, then I think that even folks like my mother, who told me when I began this that she really wished Nearest Green made lemonade, exact quote, then even people like my mom are looking at what we are doing in the community and is saying, this is undeniable. Whether I believe that this was right or wrong, there is no doubt that God's in the middle of this. And that's just what we have to do in order to really get more African Americans into this industry, is for them to be able to see this as a virtuous industry as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're doing your part. I don't know what else to say about that, really. I mean, shooting for #1, I suppose, as usual.
Well, you support and Ebony Majors, but I mean, they're there, and you're right. And what you learn, step #1 is you normalize what, you've been successful when nobody bats an eye if all of a sudden somebody sees a picture of Ebony Majors. People try Bullet, then they know it's absolutely outstanding and they try it, and then they probably wouldn't think that a Black woman is one of the primary drivers between creating a lot of these. We've worked with her before on single
Yeah,
barrels.
she's brilliant.
In Shelbyville, and she's fantastic, but it's not, she's talented, and it doesn't matter. She's just talented, right?
Yeah.
So how do you all of a sudden make people understand that these talented people exist all over the place?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
We could go on with this for a lot longer, but we are already over our 1 hour limit here. So Fawn and Sherrie, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was an
Thank you,
absolute pleasure. Everything you do is an easy thing to toast toward. And I'm personally toasting with 1856 because I think it's one of the most consistently fantastic whiskeys that you can get on our shelf year round. So appreciate you joining us again. Hopefully there's a Binny single barrel down the road that we can maybe have you on for another tasting of.
Oh, well, from what I've seen, you've got some headed your way. So I think
We
you'll
Should
do.
be soon.
And in fact, if we go into Sherry's warehouse and there happen to be a few extras laying around that sort of fell off the truck in a very Chicago way, we would be happy to take more.
Yeah, there are some on the way, but you know us. I mean, we have this undeniable drive to be first and number one, and so we're going to need more barrels. That's all. That's all.
I got it.
Oh, thank you again for joining us. Cheers, everybody. We'll see you
Cheers.
next week. We've got on Wednesday a virtual distillery tour of the Patron Distillery. Should be fun. Internet service might be spotty in and out, but we're going to try to get you a peek behind the curtain on the production of tequila next week. So until next week, cheers, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Fawn.
Cheers.
Thank you, Sherrie.
Thanks,
Thank you very
guys.
much.
Cheers.
Take care, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.